Psychoelectric, a Spinward Fringe novel, narrated by David Berlekamp, produced by Heather Berlekamp, written by Randolph Lalonde, music composed by Patrick D. Emond. Part 1. Infiltration. Chapter 1. Next to Earth. The sky was sick. Rain that reeked of sulfur and rot splattered against the glistening sidewalk. The grit covering the dark gray paving tile underfoot was being washed away, revealing dark swirls of things that were burned before they could cool and harden in the semi-transparent paving stones. There was a shape between Rafe's feet. From one angle it looked like a flower. From another it was a face. Eyes closed, lips parted, it reminded him of someone who was looking forward to an unveiling. The rare dawn light, golden through the cool drops, gave him pause as he considered what he was about to do, where he was about to send his mind. It was only the second time he'd seen the beautiful quality of that illumination. As for the crime, well, he'd broken into many places. There was nothing novel about that. A cart passed the alley opening to his right. The smell of dosa pancakes followed it, even though the cooktop and containers were covered. The memory of eating such exciting food was faint, but fresh enough to make him smile a little. The owner of the cart and other pedestrians paid him no mind. When they did notice him, they turned away quickly, pretending that they didn't see him, which suited Rafe. He moved further down the alley, minding the defect in his mechanical knee, which gave him a limp when it got wet. Another thing I'll get fixed when I get paid, he thought to himself. The dawn-shaded light took on its regular gray hue. It's almost time. Squatting in the alley against the wall, Rafe pulled the worn, half-millimeter thick warmer blanket from his pocket and wrapped it around himself. He felt like hiding. The void suit he wore covered his cybernetic limbs and his vital case torso well enough, but the right arm was left bare, and there were holes in the material stretched over his left leg. He neglected to patch them. An airtight seal wasn't necessary. Only his head was vulnerable to the weather in the city. Rafe still wished he could afford a jacket and gloves to cover the bare metal limbs. His face still looked human, and he was one of the lucky cyborgs who could still grow hair. But the rest of him looked like it was put together in some robotic junk shop, made to have the shape of a human, but only so he could use the same equipment and wear most of the same protection as one. He pulled his blanket around himself so it formed a deep hood for his head to hide in, then activated it. Warm, dry air stirred, and he sighed, enjoying the sensation of it on his ragged, drenched hair and skin. His throat was scratchy again, with a dull hurt where the flesh he was born with was joined with a synthetic system that connected it to the organs in the upper half of the vital case, his torso. The discomfort was another reminder that he wasn't put together by caring hands. He tapped the back of his hand, bringing up a small, low-resolution hologram that showed him his location. New Adalper. The time? 6:58 a.m. The regional alert level? Green. How much credit he had with the British Icon Bank? 950 platinum credits. And where the nearest high-speed Maglon Enterprise StellarNet wireless connection point was. It was 3 meters above him. The seconds passed, slowly rolling to 7 in the morning local time. His teeth chattered. He pulled a Forma nutrient pellet from his chest pocket and popped it into his mouth. The little human flesh he had seemed to take forever to warm up sometimes, and chewing the rubbery vanilla-flavored cube made his teeth stop misbehaving while the blanket did its work. He knew people passing by in the busy market street would see a figure in the dark, steam rising from a thin blanket. But no one would bother Rafe. His kind wasn't common in New Adalper, and the heat blanket was a dead giveaway that there was a cyborg huddling there. He considered the city he was hiding in. New Adalper was the first megacity founded by a human on a planet other than Earth. As the colonists began to build it, billions were starving and dying on Earth. The colonists' plan to resettle light years away started as the ecosystem was collapsing, and they left just in time to avoid getting stuck in a full-on nuclear war. Nearly a millennium later, the state of New Adulper demonstrated that humanity, for the most part, hadn't learned a thing. The population clung to the great city for the money they could make there, the level of technology competing companies could sell anyone with the platinum or credit, and the promise of unparalleled luxury. There were parts of the planet that were still Eden-like, surrounded by conditioning systems that kept them pristine and serene. Then there were the ones who came to wait for the Sol system to reopen. They clogged the stellar net with appeal after appeal for humankind's home system to allow visitors and immigrants again. A year ago, they would be greeted with a bureaucratic wall that forced them to fill out numerous applications and take even more tests. That ended, and was replaced with a warning. All vessels approaching the Sol system will be destroyed. No entry is permitted. Few people knew why. Some tried anyway and were never heard from again, and Rafe didn't much care. He stayed in New Adulper because there were 28 million people there, and the Matrix access points allowed people like him to create as many fake accounts as he wanted. He could hide amongst the physical and digital mass of people and remain perfectly anonymous. Finally warm, Rafe set the blanket to maintain 35% humidity and 21 degrees Celsius. It was 7 o'clock. The Maglon Enterprise servers were resetting their New Adulper cyberscape. They were one of many companies that hosted millions of employees who went to work and spent their leisure time in a simulated world. Every 3 months it reset, clearing all the junk from temporary memory so it could start up fresh, nearly bug-free. The honking of a hover car at the end of the alley drew his attention for a moment. It nearly struck a pair of pedestrians who were crossing. They were laughing, sharing an umbrella. The young woman's expression drained of mirth as she noticed him. The pair walked on as he focused on the task at hand. For the last time, he considered the risks and rewards. I will be using, probably burning, access codes and programs written specifically for this kind of hack. I won't have access to this facility after I use the ident I've stolen, and the chances of getting a new one that'll work in this plant will be next to zero. On the other hand, I'll be helping a crew get their people back from a place that uses humans as processing nodes. I'll have an opportunity to set the whole company back a couple of years on my way out, too. I could get caught. They could hook me up and use my brain as processing power until my personality and memories are overwritten, and I'm gone forever. He remembered finding his father in just such a state after he'd been jacked in for 2 years, 3 months, and 2 days. His body was alive, but there was nothing left of Mark Loden. Here I come, he thought with determination. With a few gestures, he set the sensors seamlessly integrated into his shoulders, hands, and feet to watch for anyone who intended to interfere with him. Rafe would be disconnected from the Matrix if they picked anything up. He shrugged deeper into the blanket and closed his eyes. Chapter 2. Maglon Local Simulation. The connection to Maglon Enterprise's servers hovered in the center of Rafe's mind's eye as a slowly rotating ME, and he activated it. A small computer installed into his head, made to compensate for a brain injury that rendered his short-term memory non-existent, provided him with an edge. The necessary cybernetic implant hid something that was far from legal in most places. A direct neural data connection that was so deep that his reaction times were instinctive. Sure, plenty of people had neural data ports, but they were surface-mounted, minimally invasive implants. They gave the user faster reaction times and allowed them to experience virtual constructs as though they were real. It was the ultimate legal, full-body experience. That was, unless you considered Rafe's situation. His implant provided a broader, deeper connectivity that made his experience perfectly vivid. People who didn't have his short-term memory defect sometimes got a similar implant installed so they could react at speeds that paralleled the human nervous system, sometimes even surpassing it thanks to coprocessors, of which Rafe had 3. If he didn't have a medical need for his system, he would have to hide the tech implanted in his brain. Rafe's avatar appeared above New Udalpur, drifting amongst the clouds, looking down on it. The sun was out, the rain was gone, and the solar panels that normally dropped the population below into shadow were tilted up so they looked more like fins on tower tops than solar collectors. In this simulation, you could walk through the city in sunlight, unlike the real world, where the panels stole the light when the skies were free of rain. The system told him that the servers were still resetting. There were millions of people hovering above, counting the seconds until they could log back in. There were countless other servers providing private and interconnected virtual worlds. They provided workspaces, worlds for games, spectator spaces that made you feel like you were really attending concerts and sporting events, and every other kind of place where you could experience something like you were really there. One of the most common and crucial services the Maglon Enterprise servers provided was secure virtual workspace. They had so many that they used the real city of New Udalpur as the template, which suited them well, since most of their clients were located there and had office space in the actual city. New Udalpur overwhelmed a continent, and in this version of it he could see the buildings, the streets, and the black water surrounding it clearly. There was no digital smog or cold rain to obscure the clutter of tall structures. Like a forest of trees that had forgotten their branches and leaves, the buildings had grown up in every elongated shape imaginable, some stretching above the rest to peek through the clouds. One side of the continent didn't exist in the real world. It was host to the stranger, more severe-looking structures that represented destinations that were off-world, but hosted by Maglon. The buildings stuck up like blades, spikes, and rods, with landing platforms and built-in hangars. Many of their designs were based on structures that existed somewhere, and he had his eye on the Ogden Processing Incorporated building. It was the newest building on the continent, representing a place that existed 63 light-years away. If it weren't for a new advancement in technology, and the distribution of nodes made by Haven Technologies that made zero-latency communication possible over such distances, he wouldn't have been able to reach that far with his mind. A warning from his proximity sensors prompted him to open his flesh-and-blood eyes. It was all right. Everyone was still waiting to log in. Keeping his connection open to the virtual world while watching the alley was near effortless. A thin, blond young man was approaching, regarding him with an expression of sympathy. The rain struck his personal energy shield, sparking and popping quietly. Light from the hover cars on the street behind him turned that energy field into a kind of red halo. The young man brought a tall, disposable cup to his lips, finished the hot drink, then carefully put it at Rafe's feet. "I can see you're far away. Maybe you can get something to eat when you come back," he said, flipping his perfectly cut hair over his shoulder as he dropped several platinum pips into the cup. "Don't get old out here while you're living in the cyberscape," he said before turning away. Maybe Rafe did look old to the young man, who couldn't have been more than 20. His hair was darker, longer, and it hung in his face. He was also dirtier, and his clothes were a mess. In truth, they were roughly the same age, but there was no time to correct that misconception. So Rafe said, "Thanks." It came out flat and mechanical, a side effect of splitting his attention. When the boy was gone, Rafe pocketed the 5 platinum and tossed the cup further down the alley. It startled a pair of thin, gray-furred rim weasels, who started fighting over it an instant later. The last thing he needed was people coming by, dropping tokens and pips in a cup when he was on a job that would pay tens of thousands. Real platinum for real work. He closed his eyes and concentrated on the cyberscape. Most crackers would have to check their inventory at that point. They'd make sure they had all the weapons, armor, and tools that represented various commands, and hopefully simulation-bending actions they could take in the virtual world. Then they'd check the security surrounding them, so they could be sure the system couldn't see that they were trying to smuggle illegal programs and items in with them. Rafe didn't bother. He'd checked all that more times than he could count. He even ran several programs that showed him what he would look like to other users. He was using the identity he'd stolen days before. The stolen avatar was 1.8 meters tall with brown hair. A casual-looking human male who looked perfectly unassuming. The most important thing about the reprogramming he'd done to the avatar was that it was nearly impossible for any system to see anything that it was carrying. If someone scanned him, they'd detect the normal stuff: casual clothes, a defensive weapon, some antivirus shielding, along with a few harmless gadgets. But there would be no hint of anything illegal. The drives and secondary computer that most people who spend a lot of time in the Matrix called their cores, where they kept all their programs or tools, was built into Rafe's chest. The small system was under a layer of armor and connected to his brain using the synthetic nervous system that tied to his vagus nerve. It was one of the few things he installed himself. The implant was the only thing he'd ever stolen in the physical world other than his freedom. The sensations of Rafe's physical body were gone again as he drifted, looking down on New Adulper. It felt good to be in a cyberscape. He was stuck there in the local Matrix. "Hey, you make time in local friend chat with me?" asked a male voice from his left. "I have happy hookah. We share. Party time." That was a scam. It was going around. Users would hang out in a log-on or waiting room, like the one they were in, and try to entice as many people as they could to follow them into a virtual hookah den. The Happy Hookah was a legitimate direct neural experience program. Players in the cyberscape bought them for their friends so they could share a euphoric experience. Most people couldn't afford the Happy Hookah on their own, so groups chipped in. If someone won one in a game, or earned one by questing for a couple dozen hours, they usually sold it or held on to it until they could get all their best friends together. No one ran around offering random people a puff on that virtual hookah, just because they were just in the mood. Somehow, scammers like the guy who approached Rafe often suckered half a dozen people at a time into joining them in a private virtual room. When they connected to the fake Happy Hookah program, the scammer could bypass their security and steal their currency along with anything in their inventory. They could even use a hit program that could burn their neural connection out, sometimes causing brain damage. If Rafe didn't have anything better to do, he would lure the scammer onto neutral ground, or a place in a simulated world like the New Dream universe, where he could waste him and take everything he could from the corpse before it disappeared. Instead, he replied, "Gotta work. Got debt with Order of Eden. Decades worth." "Oh, you cool. No worries. Bye," the scammer said in a sympathetic voice. "Hey, there are a lot of honest ways to earn plat here. You don't have to burn people for their stuff. Just do some comms work or something, you know? Help people for tokens. You'll make good money." It never really worked, telling these scammers that there was a better way. But Rafe always tried when he had the chance. "No worries. Bye," the voice repeated irritably. It irked Rafe. If he saw the scammer again, he wouldn't be as kind. It would have been a good day if he could burn his core out with a virus and take all his shit. There was a feeling then, a unique kind of eagerness that radiated upwards from the city. It was a signal to the users, telling them that the server would be online in seconds. The city lights came on. Rafe appeared in a Spartan, clean one-bedroom apartment. It belonged to the ident that he'd hacked, and wasn't the cheapest housing available, but didn't provide enough space for the user to stash all their gear for work and personal avatars. He opened the only closet, found a row of identical brown leather briefcases and a variety of safety jumpsuits, most of them white, with a couple red ones on the end. He called a shuttle and quickly dressed in a white one. Okay, so I was right. This guy definitely doesn't pay extra to have a leisure avatar in this simulation. Smart. I just hope he isn't gaming somewhere else with a few coworkers. They might notice that his work avatar is busy while he's actually somewhere else. The shuttle arrived, and Rafe walked through the doors, suitcase in hand, featureless white jumpsuit catching the light. He stepped into the small ship, sat down, and he was on his way to work. The identification he borrowed belonged to Ivan Humperdinck, an employee who was stupid enough to fall for his trap. He'd run his own scam, only his victim wouldn't know that his identity was stolen for a few hours. The small ship flew into the hangar after a simulated transit time of 15 seconds. The trip would have been much longer in the real world. Sections of the floor illuminated, directing the shuttle to its spot near the interior doors. A security guard, dressed in silver plate armor, met Rafe at the shuttle hatch. "Identify yourself and tell me your password." "I am Ivan Humperdinck," he replied slowly and clearly. "Shine on the borderlands." "Proceed. Welcome to the Gaia 3 submatrix," the guard said with plastic pleasantness as he stepped aside. That was the first real test. Rafe only glimpsed over his shoulder long enough to see that no one else managed to make it in as early as he did. He had all the same privileges and permissions as the real Ivan Humperdinck, who only showed up to his workplace in person a couple times a month. He pressed the button in the lift that would take him to the most secure area of the building, Biocore Processing. Chapter 3. I am Ivan Humperdinck. Sort of. "You in, vagabond?" asked a voice in Rafe's head. It was the client. He was using the handle Rafe's fixer gave him. It was nice to deal with someone who understood that real names could be deadly, even when you were using a neural comm connection. No matter how hard you tried to hide, there was always a chance someone was listening in. Rafe ran a check on the connection and saw that, as far as he could tell, it was secure. Moving through the halls of Ogden Processing's building as fast as he could, without triggering an alert, he replied, "I'm in. The simulation will freak out if I force it to let me move at my real speed. I've got to obey the laws of the program. You know, walk like a human in a hurry, which is just a little slow for me. Otherwise, I'd be checking for your people already."
"Wait, you're not just in, but you're past the security? You're getting close to Biocore Processing?"
Frontman asked. "Yeah, where'd you think I'd be?"
"You've been in there for 42 seconds, man. I thought you'd be arriving, not 84 stories up, about to get to the Biocore. Slow down. Take your time. We just made atmosphere," Frontman replied with a chuckle. He and his crew were really in Gaia 3 airspace, making their way to the actual Ogden Processing building there. "You guys are making sure that you do your security checks so the building doesn't open fire on you as soon as you get in range, right?" Rafe asked. Yeah, in a few seconds. Angel is getting to the login screen now,"
Frontman replied. Rafe didn't spend much time vetting them. His fixer did that, and he was starting to trust her. Besides, it was easy to see that her clients were pretty straight-laced people. Most of the time. Frontman was really named John Fuller. Angel was his wife, Prudence Fuller, and they used to work for Pandem Security Services. Neither of them had a criminal record until the galaxy was shaken by a virus that rendered every artificial intelligence dangerous or extremely expensive to own. Their records after the fall of Pandem were spotty at best, and Rafe was certain that they had to do some things they weren't proud of in order to survive over the chaotic years following the fourth fall of man. They ran a ship called the Redeemer, and they lost 4 crew members to Ogden while they were taking liberty on Gaia 3. Their crewmates were captured by debt recovery agents when they visited a 21st century-themed club called the Crisis Center. Ogden Processing Incorporated bought their debts and had them attached to a Biocore processing unit before Frontman, Angel, or the rest of their crew knew what was going on. They took it personally, and the remaining crew of the Redeemer pooled their money and put a call out on the Undernet for a hacker who could get into the Gaia 3 Matrix to help them free their crewmates. It took 7 weeks to get a response. Narrated, a fixer who helped Rafe when he first arrived in the city, and promised to set him up with work, made the match between him and the crew of the Redeemer. Rafe almost turned the job down. There was a lot of work involved, and Narrated didn't have any of the preparation done. Then she showed him the plea the Redeemer crew put out on the Undernet. Even though their identities were hidden, he could see a kind of familial loyalty that he'd never had. Then she told him that their people were taken by Ogden Processing, the same company that used his father until his brain was nothing more than an empty computing node. That cinched it, and he got to work, finding employees who would have the credentials he needed to get into the Biocore. He may not have been able to save his father, but he could help the crew of the Redeemer and do some damage. There were companies like Ogden Processing and New Adulper, and Rafe hated all of them. "I'm at a secure terminal now," he said as he entered Humperdinck's private virtual office next to the Biocore processing entrance. If there was another avatar in the room, they'd see Humperdinck typing at his computer. It was a visual representation of the connection Rafe made with the servers, where he checked the NavNet system watching the skies near the Ogden building for the Redeemer and found it. "I'm giving you clearance to dock with the intake port on this floor. Your guys are here. I can see them connected to the life support systems out in the real world. The strange thing is that there's no data connection from their processing node to the main servers."
All 4 of them? They're alive?
Asked Frontman. "Yeah, alive," Rafe replied, double-checking their status.
Are they wiped? Are we too late, Vagabond?
Frontman asked. "I can't tell from here. All I can see are their vitals. I'll know more when I get access to the system they're connected to," Rafe replied.
Why did it sound like you weren't sure of something?
Frontman asked. "It's just weird. They're part of a bioprocessing cluster that's totally air-gapped. Nothing for you guys to worry about. Come on in. I'm moving into the Biocore so I can disconnect them. I can't do it from here."
We're coming. Wait, if they're air-gapped, how did you see their status?
"Medical scanners and remote sensors. Leave all the how and why shit to me. You just make sure you're ready to run in and grab the people I free as soon as the door opens," Rafe said as he left the office and moved down the hall as quickly as his avatar was allowed. "I hate the rules of this system. I'll never understand why red flags will go up if I exceed the movement limit of this stupid avatar. It's probably so security can track everyone through the system," a woman's voice said through the connection Rafe had with the Redeemer. "And hi, I'm Angel. I just realized this is the first time I've actually spoken to you. It's good to meet you, Vagabond." "Hi, you're right. It's probably not a problem for most people who interface using a topical brain bud or skulljack. I guess they wouldn't notice considering their connection speed," Rafe said as he watched the thick double doors part for him. The lights started coming on in the room beyond, and he shook his head. "Confirmed. Your people are here. I see them. Good avatar auto-generation here. The program is mirroring the real world and everything in it perfectly." There were 9 humans suspended on membrane beds that were made of thin, rubbery, plastic material stretched between metal arms. They were connected to a central medical maintenance device through tubes leading to every orifice except their eyes and ears. A suit covered the rest, linking all their surface nerves to the machine. Thick cables that glowed rich, bright colors led to jacks in their heads. There was a pillar with high-speed data storage and enough computing power to organize the work as the brains connected to it worked to complete a task that was still a mystery to Rafe. In the physical world that Frontman and his crew moved through, The cables wouldn't be glowing, but the rest was the same. Rafe made a direct connection to the processing node the human work group was connected to and smiled. They were working on something special. The program in the node's memory was archived as the human minds worked on some kind of modification for it. He guessed that as soon as they finished, the program would be decrypted, the modifications would be applied, and it would run a test. Whatever software they were developing was a secret. Otherwise, it would be in the company's main data storage. More important than any of that was the condition of the people connected to the processing node. Your crew members are mostly intact. They will have about 91% of their memories, and it doesn't look like they've been neurally evened out, so they'll be emotionally intact. Well, as intact as anyone who's been connected to a machine that forces their brains to work like an organic computer can be. Extract the intubation and cut the rest of the cables as fast as you can, then run. Take all 9.
So you want us to take 5 more, not just our people?
Frontman asked. Yeah, you've got plenty of room. I've seen the schematics of your ship. There's lots of space in the hold, Rafe said as his avatar started typing at a terminal beside the door. He used Humperdinck's credentials to lock all the routes security could take to get to the biocore. That wouldn't hold for long against serious corporate soldiers, so he started using his own computer rig to line up a series of viruses that would force a lockdown once he activated them. You won't have trouble from the other people connected to the biocores. They're not criminals, just debtors. How are you forcing the system to release them? Angel asked. The same way I'm getting your guys out. I'm using this employee's account to pay all their debts off. The asshole who ran this unit was well paid. Anyway, the system will release them and go into standby mode as soon as their debts are zeroed out. With a final stroke at the terminal, it was done. The debts of the 9 people were paid. Until someone took a closer look at the logs, or Humperdinck noticed over 60,000 platinum missing from his account, they would be treated like they'd served their time.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course we'll take all 9. But this isn't going to be pretty. We might need a little more time to get them out,
Frontman said. The docking port down the hall from the biocore room irised open, and Rafe could see the Redeemer, a short-ranged courier ship, line up and dock with a thump through the security scanners monitoring the physical version of the building. Good. This is a fucking nightmare. If I could free every mind here, I would. But I know some of them are so pattern-worn that there's nothing human about their gray matter except for an underserved amygdala. May as well be brain-dead. But our people are okay, Angel asked. Rafe could see that the crew of the Redeemer were rushing through the airlock in identical black vac suits. None of them were their actual size or height. He would be surprised if this was their first robbery. I said they're fine. I'm talking about people on the lower floors. Alarms went off throughout the building. Security was aware that there was a physical breach. As soon as Rafe saw one of the crew members of the Redeemer jam a pry bar into the workings of the airlock, preventing it from closing, he activated a lockdown in the physical building. The Redeemer crew had a clear path between the airlock and the biocore room that their crewmates were in. The next part made Rafe's avatar grin. Humperdinck had access to the research database for the whole company. He wasn't just a workaday stooge, but part of the research and data review team. Rafe wrote a simple script that would use Humperdinck's account to update the studies and data that he had access to as if he was performing normal work, but it would enter random data instead. As that began executing on hundreds of thousands of documents, Rafe located the backups, ran a decryption program to crack the password, then started a recrystallization of the drives the backups were made on. When he was sure that was underway, he copied a package of viruses to active memory and watched as they ran loose. They may not operate for long, but the antivirus software the company was running would lock every workstation and server down, as the viruses and custom ransomware spread, stopping the company from operating for at least a few minutes, probably a few hours. The rest of the damage would be done by then, and the downtime would cost the company millions, maybe even a few billion. As a flourish that was more for his own enjoyment, he activated an animation for his digital persona to perform. His straight-laced avatar pulled a pair of grenades out of his hip pockets, opened an access panel beneath the terminal, pulled the pins, tossed them inside, closed the panel, then stepped away. A loud pop-pop sounded, and a curl of black smoke rose from the bulging terminal door. "My command and control interface just went dead," Angel said, as the crew of the Redeemer rushed into the room and started cutting the members of the Biocore free of their tubes and wires. "It's protecting itself from the viruses I launched a few seconds ago. Don't worry, just move," Rafe replied. "Comms are about to go down, so I'll see you on the other side. Good luck."
What? You're not covering us?
Frontman asked. Through the security system, Rafe could see the tallest figure in black look up as he threw one of the freed humans over his shoulder. That was him. Most people looked up when they were talking to someone they believed was in a computer system. "You're covered," Rafe replied flatly, taking a peek at the building's operating system. It was about to fail utterly, starting with security. His ransomware hid the operation of thousands of viruses that forced a full lockdown, making it impossible to open any door that wasn't already braced. All that was left was the air-gapped system. "Connect a wireless-capable computer to the data management system," he told Angel.
"No more extracurriculars,"
Frontman replied.
"Sorry, but we gotta go."
"Don't you want to know what those 9 heads were developing? I'll wipe the drives once I see what's inside. Cost the company a few million plat," Rafe countered.
"Get us into more trouble, you mean? If you wipe that, they might—"
Rafe couldn't hear what Frontman said next. As predicted, communications in the building failed, which meant Rafe's end of the connection was about to die. Frontman had one body over each shoulder and ran off along with 5 other burly men who were just as capable. Everyone from that biocore was being carried to the Redeemer. To his surprise, Angel plugged a small wireless dongle into the data core all the humans were connected to, then stepped back, miming the act of washing her hands before she ran after her husband and the rest of the crew. "Thank you. Now let's see if I can take a souvenir," Rafe thought as his connection to the Gaia 3 submatrix started failing. He could feel the bandwidth lessening, and he reconnected to the communicator Angel plugged into the data core. There was a massive database file that he didn't see before. It was too large to transfer in the time he had. The compressed file, with complex digital rights management built in, was still there. It prevented more than one copy at a time from existing, which suited his purposes. He downloaded it, knowing that the archive would delete the original the picosecond it finished uploading to him. The tether to the Gaia 3 simulated environment and the wireless connection to the cheap dongle failed as the building's main communications system finally failed. To Rafe's delight, his download was complete. Chapter 5. The Nest. As the police converged on the intersection, Rafe became more and more alarmed. Officers in sleek armor and white gold helmets that gleamed clean scanned the area, while a pair of social wellness counselors interviewed the passengers. Drones, the size of his hand, hovered around them, recording everything they had to say, while they used sensors to record more details about the scene. Since his body was stolen, Rafe's encounters with police became increasingly negative. He'd been scanned, more times than anyone could count, by officers who were suspicious of his metal body. The fake job number he used when law enforcement asked about his construction was probably due to be replaced. It had been given out more than half a dozen times. All that scrutiny and suspicion came before he did anything wrong. As he watched the police officers supervise a few heavy lifters as they got ready to move the bus, Rafe was filled with an increasing feeling of dread. He didn't know how many crimes they could charge him with, but one thing was certain. They'd remove any part of his body that they thought was dangerous if he was caught. For him, that was most of his rig. No law enforcement agency would let him keep arms that could punch through walls or jump 30 meters straight up in normal gravity. They may even take his secondary computer or reduce him to a head in a vital case. If there was evidence that could lead back to him, it would be found. It would be useful to law enforcement if the transit company wanted to press charges or the passengers wanted to pursue civil action. Maybe I'm being paranoid. I hope they understand that I couldn't watch that girl get smeared. I hope they do, he thought to himself as he peeked over the lip of the dumpster. All that data collection wasn't as worrying as what he suspected he'd find online, however. Fear made him hesitate, but there was no point in waiting any longer. Rafe logged on to the nearest uplink node so he could mentally browse through the various social media and local news sites, and he found what he was afraid of in seconds. There was a post on Live Live, a social media stream that people typically shared life experiences on in short, boisterous video clips, by the young teen he'd saved. She'd used the hashtag #ColdBoyHero. Oh no. Oh no, Rafe muttered to himself as he looked at the post with his mind's eye. Grinning into the recorder, she held her hoverboard up. It had a sizable notch in the side, and she was pointing to it. Major goof this morning. I nearly got hit by a big hover bus. My board is a little banged, but all I've got is this little bruise. It barely hurts. She pointed to one side of her jaw where there was a slight discoloration. Start at the beginning, Sadie, a young man said from behind her as he looked at the dent on her board. Yeah, okay.